Hey humans, how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. I'm very excited because this is the 100th episode, and Hey Human is the little podcast that could and keeps on. It's very cool that I've been able to keep doing this, and I owe it all to you all for listening. So thank you very much, and thank you for sharing it with your friends and people you know and family and all that stuff. It's great. I love doing it, and I'm thrilled. I can't believe we've made it to 100 episodes. And by we, I mean you guys and me, because we are in this together. Before I go into a little detail on this episode, I want to thank David Hall, who came over and helped teach me some very cool engineering tricks that I will be using in upcoming episodes. And I really appreciate that, David. And he also brought over some sound deadening panel things that I could put in my little podcast room that I am going to start doing these interviews in instead of the kitchen. So that'll make the sound a little bit more podcasty, I suppose. Couple things. As always, of course, in celebration of the 100th episode, I would love it if you would go to iTunes and rate and review. It's super helpful, gets the word out. The reviews that are on there already are sensational, and thank you for everybody that has done that so far. I really appreciate that. The website, of course, is heyhumanpodcast.com, and it has the Amazon portal. So far, I've been able to keep Hey Human ad-free, but the Amazon portal does help support Hey Human in its own way. So if you do Amazon shopping, please visit heyhumanpodcast.com and click on that portal on the homepage for Amazon and do your shopping and help support Hey Human. I'm on social media, Hey Human Podcast, and also on Twitter, Susan Ruthism. And you can email me, susan@heyhumanpodcast.com. Also, I just want to mention that, of course, I have music out on iTunes as well under Susan Ruth. I think it's on Spotify. Well, I know it's on Spotify, also under Susan Ruth if you want to check out my music. And I'm just letting it all out there because it's the 100th episode. Might as well. And SusanRuth.com. Did I say that already? I don't know. The cold medicine and the memories, they don't go hand in hand. This episode in celebration, I thought I'd go back to the beginning, and by the beginning, I meant my beginning, and by my beginning, I meant my parents. So a little while back, I interviewed my parents, and so it'll be my mom's interview and then my dad's interview on this. So the episode itself is going to seem kind of long, but it's actually 2 interviews in one. So my mom and dad are very hilarious, I think, in their own ways. My mom is very gregarious. Dad's more chill. It was really delightful to talk to them and hear family stories, hear their childhood and the experiences that they had moving into adulthood, that kind of thing. It was fun for me, and I don't know, maybe it'll be weird for you to hear what my parents are like, but I enjoyed it very much. So maybe for the 100th episode, I was being a little self-serving, but I do, and I say this on during one of the interviews between my parents, that if you get the chance to sit your parents or your grandparents down and ask them their story and their life and record it, it's really magical to have that, I think. And both my parents have been really supportive of all of my creative endeavors, and so I really appreciate the fact that they took time out of their incredibly busy retirement schedule. They do more now, I swear, than they ever did before they retired. But I really appreciate that they took the time to talk with me, and I hope you all enjoy it. Here we go. Happy 100th. Hi, Mom.
Hi, Suze.
Welcome to Hey Human Podcast, Nan, but otherwise known as Mom. Usually known as Mom to me, but not to them. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi. You were born in
California.
Yeah. And you grew up a military daughter.
Yes, and we moved around a whole lot until the war came along.
Okay. And you have some really great stories of your
traversing around. There's one in particular that you posted on Facebook, the Guam story. You want to retell that one? 'Cause it's
Oh,
a
the
fun
Guam
one.
story on Facebook? Well, that's pretty late in life. I was 14 by that time.
Okay.
I was 8 at Pearl Harbor.
Well, let's talk about that first then.
Yeah,
You
well,
direct me. I'll just follow along.
well, I had to stay behind when my parents went to the new duty station on Oahu, and that my parents had to leave me behind because I had braces, and orthodontia, has to keep regular hours. So they had to find me a new dentist before I could join them.
In Hawaii?
In Oahu, yeah.
Okay.
In Honolulu. So I was 8 and stayed behind until they found the dentist. And I went to Hawaii first class on the Matsonia, which was pretty good because Mama had gone third class.
What's the Matsonia?
Matsonia was a very famous ship that plied the waters between San Francisco and Hawaii.
Cool.
Yeah, it was part of the Matson line, and that's why it was called the Matsonia. And they had wonderful menus, hand-painted. It was just a great trip. And I was 8, and so there was a stewardess assigned to
Care for you.
watch out for me. And while I was there, I met a very charming lieutenant in the Army who escorted me to movies on board with the consent of my chaperone. And so I was always picking up handsome young men at the age of 8. I didn't work so well when I got older, but it was fine at that age. The thing that was fun about it took 5 days to get there, so I saw a lot of movies.
Yeah.
And I get there, and I was there, maybe a month. No, not quite a month. Maybe 3 weeks, 2 weeks.
Uh-huh.
When I got up to go to Sunday school one morning, and it was very quiet. And Mama picked up the phone to call the neighbor's kid who was going to ride with us to Sunday school. And it was no phone service, which was very odd. So Mama screamed, "This is an emergency. I need an emergency." So it wasn't an emergency, but they put her through anyway because I guess she sounded authoritarian.
To put her through to your dad?
To the person down the street whose daughter was coming with us. Well, needless to say, we didn't get to Sunday school that morning.
No.
That was December 7th, and it was 8 o'clock in the morning, and there were strange things going on. So,
What do you remember?
well, I remember running up and down saying, "Isn't this fun, Mommy?"
Because you didn't have to go to Sunday school?
No, I mean, there was so much going on. It was just that there were people all over the place, and, Mommy didn't think it was so much fun.
No.
But,
And your father was in the harbor, was he not?
No, he was not.
Where was he?
He was in a small fleet of ships that were en route between Pearl Harbor and Wake Island, and they were halfway between
Wow.
when both Wake and Pearl Harbor were kind of destroyed, and so they escaped.
And he being a
He was
rear admiral?
no, he was
Re-
not. No, he was not then. He was a lieutenant.
Well, I don't know. I mean,
He was.
he eventually became.
He eventually became what they call a Portuguese rear admiral, which is all brass and no gold, which was an honorary thing they gave him when he retired for being such a wonderful naval officer.
I see.
So,
Had he reached a high rank? But what?
he reached the next rank below that,
Oh, okay.
which was captain.
Okay.
At that time,
So he retired a
They
rear
had
admiral.
only 2 commodores in the Navy at that time, and they were grandfathered. I mean, they were in there forever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what was your question, hon?
So all this was going on, and grandfather was out in the.
He was out at sea.
So he missed all the hubbub, and I assume what did they do?
Oh, they did not turn around and come back for a while. They waited for orders,
Yeah.
and they eventually came back. But the thing that was so interesting is, of course, immediately we were put on blackout, and we lived right next door to an
That was so you wouldn't be a target, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Indeed, and they had no idea that they weren't going to invade, so they sent Marines around to all over the place to guard various places and watch streets and so forth. And we lived right next door to an Army fort, and not a shot was fired from there, but I guess because no planes really came over it, so they couldn't really fire a shot. But what I remember was and this is a story I had on my blog, I think, if I remember, about Pearl Harbor, that night there was a knock on the door, and Mama's friend, the mother of the daughter that was going to go with me, was terrified and didn't know what to do. So Mama said we would stay overnight at her house. So we were down there, and there was a knock on the door, and on the doorstep were just the grungiest looking young men you ever saw in your life. I mean, their faces were black and their clothes were dirty, and and they said that they were Marines, and they had been sent to check up and make sure we were safe. One of them was 19, and the other one had lied. He was only 17. And the two of them had swum 1,000 yards under burning oil from the USS Oklahoma, which sank in Pearl Harbor. And they were, that night were sent out to do duty on the...
Oh, my God.
Yeah, you bet. So Mama looked at them, and she said, "You're Marines, right?" They said, "Yes, ma'am." And she said, "You guys," she says, "Marines don't look like that." She says, "Come in, take a shower." This is in somebody else's house, mind you.
Yes.
And
That's Grandma, though. I remember Grandma was a ball buster.
yeah, Grandma was. And so they scrounged up khaki uniforms, because, of course, the Marines didn't wear navy blues or whites for them. And
they swam under burning oil.
1,000 feet, 1,000 yards.
1,000 yards, yeah.
Under burning oil to escape.
Insane.
Yeah. And then they were put on guard duty.
Of course.
Yes. They're Marines.
They're Marines.
So, yeah. So they were all cleaned and pressed, and they were much happier. My mama expressed some concern for them. She said, "Are you sure you guys are all right after all that?" She didn't quite put it that way, of course. Sure. She was a little more elegant. But they said, "Oh, yes, ma'am, we're Marines."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, but I will not forget that soon. And then we used to sit out during the blackouts. We used to sit out and in the evenings, and there was we lived in an alley that had little cottages on either side. And one of the cottages was infested by some local police. And they were Hawaiians, of course. So, of course, they sang and played musical instruments. So every night they would come out on their porch, and they would sing and play the ukulele. And this is all in the dark, mind you. And we would sit out on the porch and listen to them. And we also would listen to the radio, because that was the only communication we had. And there were no lights. And I remember Mama used to hand me anyway, her cigarette, so that I could make fiery circles.
Sure.
Yeah, it was very interesting. We, of course, had the longest Christmas vacation in the world. We didn't go back to school until January, because remember, it was December 7th, so that's quite a while, because they had to dig trenches and get gas masks ready for kids and so forth. And I have a picture of me in a gas mask that's on my blog. It's really hysterical.
Wow. What's your blog?
My blog is called Aunt Nan's Eclectic Ink and Blabula.
Gee, that's not long or anything. I'll put a link to it on heyhumanpodcast.com.
Yeah, well, I haven't kept it up much, but that story's on there, and stories about your grandmother and your great-grandmother are on there.
Who was also a ball-busting badass.
Oh, yeah. She
grandma.
was what we used to call in the vernacular a freewheeling bitch.
Yeah, God bless.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. She was something else. I mean, you've got some weird genes going on there, kid.
Clearly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The women in our family are pretty badass, from what I understand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They take no shit from nobody's.
No, but also we're world famous, most of us.
Yeah, you have quite the lineage.
Yeah, and if you Google my academic name, you'll find that I'm still cited in some things, even though what I wrote was, now 40 years ago?
Oh, sure. We'll get to that.
But ancient history is still ancient.
Still ancient history. Yeah, exactly. So, tell the Guam story, because that's so fun.
Oh, the Guam story? Well, when I was 14, I came home from school, and Mama said, "Go pack. We're leaving in 24 hours for Guam." And I said, what? She said, we're leaving for 24 hours for Guam, and we have to get
in 24 hours or 4?
in 24 hours.
Okay, yeah.
In 24 hours. Now, this was in 1946. It wasn't very long after the war. So it was.
Were you in Oahu until the war ended then?
No, we were in Oahu until the August of 1942, when finally we came home because Daddy was transferred to San Francisco for a while. So we came home, or transferred to another ship anyway, and it was not going to be going out of Oahu. So we came back to the mainland, and that's a funny story.
And
too.
your father was quite famous in the Navy, was he not? He wrote some sort of song or something.
Oh yeah, he was quite a character. But getting back to leaving,
what was the song? Just really quick.
Navy Where Navy was the name of it, and I think it's still published. It's there somewhere. Somebody, I don't think anybody's ever getting royalties on it because they donated the royalties. He and the lady that wrote it with him.
Yeah.
But the trip to Hawaii, remember I said took 5 days?
Yes.
Took 19 days to come home in a convoy zigzagging across the Pacific.
Because they didn't want to get hit by anything? Why would they zigzag?
Well, yeah, because you don't do a direct route if the Japanese are out to get,
Yeah, sure.
And there were mines and things.
Oh my gosh.
And of course,
Were
by
you
then,
aware of that kind of stuff?
Oh yeah, I was, after all, 8 and 9 years old.
Yeah.
I was no kid. I mean,
Sure.
I was not stupid.
No, I understand, but I don't know the extent to which parentals hide things like that from their children.
Well, they couldn't hide it very well, honey, because war was everywhere.
Yeah.
And
So you serpentined your way back.
yeah, and so we landed. We landed at San Francisco. And Mama steps to the dock to the public phone, which they had in those days, believe it or not. They really had phones on every corner.
Yeah, I believe it. Not a Starbucks. They've turned into Starbucks.
Yeah, right. It was a larval stage of Starbucks,
Yes,
actually.
right, exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, so we get there, and she's calling up my grandmother, Bam Bam, we called her.
Bam, bam.
Yeah. And Mama said, hello, and Bam Bam said hello, and Mama said, can you feed 2 more for dinner? And Bam Bam said, of course, who is it? So for some reason they had an extra, there's rationing, remember? Sure. They had an extra pork chop, so we managed to get over to Berkeley, to the house, and we spent the next several years there until 1945 or so, when Mama and Daddy bought a house in Berkeley. And because Daddy, by that time, had come back to serve as the head of training in San Francisco. So he was out of the range of the firing by them because the war was over. But they bought the house, and we were there until the summer of '46, when we went to Guam for 2.5 years. It was fascinating.
Yeah, I've never been to Guam, but I've heard stories.
Well, it's
from
not
you,
the
of course.
same. When we got there, there were still soldiers in the hills, and there were Japanese prisoners in trucks going by all the time, because they did a lot of the hard labor, and they were really happy too, because they got 80 cents a day. The Japanese prisoners, they earned their board and room and 80 cents a day. And that was more than a Japanese cabinet minister made at the
Really?
time. Yeah.
Yeah, but they had to do hard labor, so.
Well, hard labor meaning they had to build the houses for the
Okay.
military and so forth. Nothing very, nothing.
They weren't treated poorly. in
Oh,
other words.
no. And they were mostly glad to be out of it,
Yeah.
because, and I remember
A lot
one.
different than what was probably going on elsewhere, like the internment camps and things.
Yeah.
Which,
Well, the internment camps were one thing that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was mistaken about. They should never have done that.
no, of course not.
And of course, the Japanese internment camps were unspeakable.
Yes.
But well, I remember on Guam, while they were building the houses after the notorious hijacking. Should I tell the? Yeah. Well, of course, when we got there, we had to stay in the bachelor officers' quarters, which were huge elephant quonsets with 2 floors. I mean, they were just, and it was an unused one, of course, because they put all the families of the officers' families in there, and they were building houses like mad. But they ran out of plywood before they finished the houses in the place where we were going to be. For the enlisted men. The officers, of course, were going to wait till the enlisted men housing was built, and then the enlisted men could get their families over, you see. And and in those days, they still had houseboys and stuff like that. So, which ties into the story eventually anyway. But the plywood ran out, and they wouldn't get any. Nobody would let them requisition anymore. This naval supply didn't have any, and nobody had any plywood to finish the houses.
Building the houses.
Couldn't finish building the houses, and the families couldn't come over, and the natives were getting restless, you know.
Yeah.
So one day, Mama and the boss's wife were at the commissary, and they came out and they saw a semi-truck from the Army. Clearly labeled from the Army, with a flat tire on the trailer, and the idiots who were driving it unhooked the tractor and drove off
to go get a tire.
To go get a tire. So Mama and Aunt Grace went back into the commissary and commandeered the phone and called up the base.
Called up the naval base.
Yeah, the naval base where, and within, I'd say 6 or 7 minutes, a tractor pulls up.
A naval tractor.
Navy tractor pulls up with a tire, changes the tire, hitches up the trailer, and drives off.
They stole the Army's wood.
They hijacked the plywood, but the houses got finished.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, and to this day, nobody even, unless they probably found the rotting hulk of the semi-trailer when they built the road. The road didn't go all the way around the island in those days. It stopped where our housing area was on the one side, and in a village called Merida on the other side. Mm-hmm. And in the map I put on my Facebook page, you can see where that is.
Yeah.
Merida, and there's a gap of maybe 5 miles there that didn't have a road. So everything that was useless or one wanted to dispose of went up into that little area between Merida and our housing area, including the semi.
Yes.
So
that's a great story.
Yeah, that was funny. And nobody, of course, at the commissary saw a thing, although it was interesting because there apparently had been quite a group watching all this go on.
Yes.
But nobody saw anything. When the Army came back with the tractor and the trailer was gone, they went, I don't know whatever happened to them.
I hope they didn't get court-martialed.
Well, I don't think they would, because it wasn't,
Yeah.
But they probably were told never, 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 never leave a semi-load of plywood alone again. I mean, they didn't post a guard. That was stupid.
Yeah. And especially with Grandma running around.
Oh, yeah, Grandma. Well, one of the things in Honolulu, I remember Grandma, but backtracking a little bit with Grandma, was that everybody who had a firearm was asked to go down to the police station and tell the police that they had it. And so Mama dutifully went down to the police station, and she stands in line to present her firearm, and it's a .22 single-shot Colt that my grandmother, not yours, but my grandmother was a crack shot with.
Is that Helen?
Susan, the one you're named after.
Oh, great-grandma Susan.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
She was a sharpshooter?
Oh, yeah, she was a champion shot.
Of course she was. Hilarious.
Yeah, so so Mama turns the gun in, and the guy inspects it, and he hands it back, butt first, with a little bow, and he says, "Madam, keep this for your own protection." And Mama says she had a flash of herself standing on the doorstep with a pile of bullets, saying, "Okay, boys, line up. This only fires one shot at a time."
That's hilarious. Oh, man. So, how long were you in Guam?
2.5 years.
Yeah.
2.5 of the longest
Who
years.
had the Coca-Cola with a bug in it?
Mama.
Okay.
She had half a bug.
Oh,
The whole bug would have been better, but half a bug.
Yeah.
So she went down to the Coca-Cola place and negotiated, and we got 10 free cases of Coke delivered to our house every week. And the kids, we didn't have anything else, so we drank the Coke,
Yeah. Amazing all your teeth didn't fall out of your head.
Well, they almost did. I went to Guam with not a single cavity, even though I'd had braces for 5 years. And I came back from Guam with 32. So.
Holy moly!
Mm-hmm.
That's insane.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Little ones mostly, but still 32 of them. So
crazy.
drink your milk, kiddies.
Yeah, well, or
We didn't
other
have
things,
milk.
fortified stuff.
Well, we didn't have milk. We didn't have fresh vegetables. We
I
didn't
didn't get a single cavity in my whole life.
Yeah, well, just knock on wood, honey, because there's still years of your life to go.
I guess that's true. Yeah, you guys, I remember you saying that you didn't, growing up, you didn't have, because things were rationed and...
Well, things were rationed during the war, but we managed anyway. And, then
And you're an
most of
only
the time,
child.
yeah. And we managed, rationing for the United States wasn't anywhere near what it was like for, say,
Europe.
Great Britain, because we didn't have to be rationed. We were rationed because it was a good public,
Sure.
Whatever you want to call it, PO
Yeah.
move.
So you went back to California after
Right,
Guam?
yeah, I lived in Berkeley.
Yeah, and finished up your high school?
Well, first thing, I finished up my high school. What did I do? Came back to Berkeley, stayed there for a while, then went to Berkeley High. I had started high school in Guam. Went to Berkeley High, but we also went to Coronado, California, and I was in high school there for a while. And came up to Bremerton in Washington
Really?
State. Was in high school there for a while.
I didn't know that.
So I was, and there was, so that was Guam, Berkeley, Coronado, and Bremerton, and then Berkeley again.
How is that as a young woman moving from place to place? It's supposed to be
It's
hard.
not fun.
No.
Well, at least in Berkeley, I knew people,
Yeah.
and
all
that's
the other
that's
places-
where I graduated
Okay.
from. In the class of 1950, in the beautiful new auditorium we inaugurated. It was really nice.
When did archaeology and classics and the Greek
Well, I had,
mythologies?
when I was a little kid, or when we were living there, when I was a really little kid and living with Auntie Quayle used to read to me.
Tell me what Quayle's actual... Somebody asked me this the other day. They said, what was your Aunt Quayle? My great Aunt Quayle was a children's book writer and an awesome little old lady. She, I don't know what her actual name is. It's not...
Helena Ann.
I wondered if it was Helen, but I couldn't remember.
Helena
Ann. And how did she get Quayle as a moniker?
Because when she was born, and they looked at her and said she looked like a little brown quail, so she was Quayle ever since.
Okay.
She was legally Quayle. In the end, she used Quayle all the time, and professionally she was Quayle. So her books are written as Quayle.
Quayle Hawkins. Yeah, I have a couple of them. I come across them every once in a while in used bookstores, and I buy them. But yeah, she's got a great legacy there.
Yeah, she wrote, and she was also the world's expert on children's books for a while, and wrote the Encyclopedia Britannica article for 1 year. I remember. I mean, people from all...
Wasn't she friends with Beverly Cleary?
Oh, yes. Beverly Cleary's 100 now. Would you believe it? There was an article about her in the paper. It was wonderful last Sunday.
cool.
Sunday, yeah, in the book review section. I'll have to
It's
show it to
funny
you.
when I tell people about who my family has rubbed shoulders with and been friends with. Like Grandpa, right, was in the academy with Heinlein.
Robert Heinlein.
Yeah, like what?
Yeah. Well, I told you, Susan,
And the
as
great
you were
story-
growing up, I told you that nothing ever happens of consequence in this world that doesn't involve a Hawkins, however peripherally.
Yeah.
For
They're
instance,
their own Kevin Bacon. They're their
for the
own 6
last
degrees
man
of
hung in
Hawkins.
Suffolk County was a Hawkins.
The what?
The last man hung in Suffolk County was a Hawkins. Suffolk County, New York, Long Island, was a Hawkins. But I don't think he was related to us.
Was he one of us? Oh,
I don't
okay.
think he was related
Well,
to us. No.
there's a hanging. It's probably related.
Well,
to us.
there was my cousin Mary, your second cousin Mary, who was living in Dallas, was babysat the kids of the policeman who was shot when Kennedy was shot. So that's
It's
the
like
kind of
we're-
thing that happens
so
to
we're
us.
bad luck, is that what you're saying?
No.
We just have strange degrees.
We just
of
have
separation.
strange degrees
We
of
have-
separation.
We have
Yeah.
a lot of famous people within the family as well, but it's just
Oh,
kind
yeah.
of fun to know that, that my big brother broke the Hugo of
No, he didn't break it, honey.
I thought
He teethed on it.
Oh, he teethed it.
He
Jeremy says he
teethed
broke it.
on it. He didn't break it. He didn't even scratch it. He just put it in his mouth and chewed on it.
Okay, well, that's
Frank
different.
Herbert's Hugo.
Oh, it was Frank Herbert's Hugo.
Frank Herbert of Dune fame.
It wasn't Heinlein's.
No, Heinlein. No. In Heinlein, he mistook the bidet for the toilet at
Oh, my
Heinlein's
gosh.
house. But he was only a little kid.
Oh
What
my
can
gosh,
I?
that's so funny. So I missed. I just was telling somebody the story, and I mixed those two stories together. I didn't realize it was Herbert. All the stories over the couple decades get so convoluted that and as stories do, and as memories do, that it's really interesting to just sit down and not to call you a horse, but
Right.
from the horse's mouth to hear exactly.
If you can possibly get your grandparents to tell you about their lives, do it, and record it.
Absolutely.
Because, like my grandfather, who invented OSS, which is the Army Secret Service in his day.
This is Cox.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can read about it.
He was
Alexander Bacon Cox, and you can Google him, and it's Cox with an E. You can Google him, and he turns up to be quite an interesting character.
Yeah.
So but he invented OSS. Well, anyway, when he lived in his last few years with your grandmother and grandfather, we kept trying to get him to tell the stories, and he would never tell them. And we've always wanted to know some of the stories. And, we didn't want him to divulge any secrets,
Sure.
but we just wanted to know what happened.
I think it's a good thing to have. The family stories.
For instance, we always suspected that the U.S. government knew exactly what was going to happen at Pearl Harbor. They didn't know they wouldn't invade, but they knew that Pearl Harbor was a target.
Sure.
Because they broke the code. And your grandfather had been in Washington as in Army intelligence. They'd recalled him, and he was there, and he resigned from that because they wouldn't listen to him, and because he kept writing Mama and telling her to come home from Hawaii, and this was before the war. And when Pearl Harbor happened,
he was writing his daughter.
Yeah.
Saying, "Get the hell out of there."
Yeah, but never saying why.
Yeah.
But inventing all sorts of reasons why she shouldn't be there, and that was why. Well, we've always been convinced that they knew that this was going to happen and when it was going to happen.
Was he the one that was friends with the woman that
Nellie Bly?
Nellie Bly.
Well, no, he wasn't exactly friends
but
with her.
But he helped her somehow?
Yes, he got her out of Paris at one point when she was trying to get home. And we have a letter somewhere that thanks him for that.
It's
and
safe.
Then we also have a letter somewhere that mentions, it was written on what we used to call Armistice Day, which was always the 11th of November. And that was the day that the armistice was signed for the First World War. And your grandfather received the original telegram about that it had been done.
Wow. I hope that's in a safe.
Daddy, when he cleaned out the room he uses for building things and
my daddy,
fly fishing and stuff, he moved everything, and God knows it's in a pile somewhere down in the basement.
Oh my God, you people freak me out.
Well, he freaked me out because I was supposed to be clearing it out, and I was taking my sweet time though, and he decided to just do it. So he took everything out, and there's several things that had gone missing that
but
he
they're down there
regrets now.
somewhere.
Like the OED is down there somewhere.
I don't know what that is, but
Oxford English Dictionary?
Oh, okay.
Good heavens, woman.
Well, I know what the Oxford English Dictionary is. I don't know your, hashtag slang, you modern woman, the OED.
Well, it's always called the OED, and the classical dictionary is the OCD. So that's to distinguish them.
Yeah, well, I'm sure someone with OCD made sure of that, but anyway. So you're back in Berkeley. You've graduated from high school after 5 different schools.
Well, but in between was Guam, Guam, back in Berkeley.
But what drew you to the classics and to mythology and to
I started to tell you, Annie Quayle used to read to me, and one of the books she read to me was the Tales of Troy, Patriarch Column's Adventures of Odysseus and the Tales of Troy. And I was hooked, so I always read anything about the Greeks. I read Greek poetry. Well, I was allowed, when we lived with Bam Bam and Quayle, I was allowed carte blanche at the library, which was pretty vast. and nobody said I couldn't read anything. So I read things. I read Greek poetry and translation. I read Anais Nin.
I love Anais Nin.
Yeah, but at 10, it was a little over my head.
Well, it's a little racy for a
Yeah, it was
10-year-old.
over my head, too.
Sure.
I read Brave New World by Aldous Huxley.
Yes,
and
exceptional
I read
book.
The Fountainhead. And I read, all these things when between the ages of 10 and about 13.
Shaping you to be a little intellect.
And the New Yorker every week.
Yes,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, so shaping me to be whatever.
Yeah.
But I always went for, and the Greek plays in translation. Gilbert Hyatt had a 3-volume set, which I own now, that I read.
Uh-huh.
So I
So you
always
just
was
were really
interested.
into it.
But I never had, and of course when I was in college, I took all the classes I could, but I never had the opportunity to study it in depth like I did when I got to the University of Washington. So
Yeah. And your PhD is in
drama arts
drama arts, but your specialty,
was actually turned out to be classical archaeology,
yeah, so
which has a lot to do with drama arts.
explain
but-
what classical archaeology is, because when I tell people that you are archaeologist, classics person, Greek, and I would say you know a lot about Egypt too, at least the mythologies. I don't know
some
about
of
the
it.
architecture,
I know
but
some a little bit about it, not enough.
but a lot about the Greeks.
But I know how to find out.
Yeah.
I know a lot about the Greeks and not so much about the Romans because I wasn't so interested in the Romans, but I was fascinated by the Greeks and I was sort of in love with Odysseus.
Yes. Well, I'm sure many were.
Yeah.
I remember you telling me, unless I'm remembering incorrectly, which seems to happen sometimes, but did I paint that right there? Or is that you?
This one you did.
I thought that looks like me.
Yeah.
I remember you telling me that the first time you arrived in Greece, you didn't need any maps or anything. It was like you would come back to where you had always been.
Where I'd always been, yeah. And it was really interesting because when I got to Mycenae, which was where Agamemnon was king, I knew that's where I'd been. And of course, that's a little woo-woo for some people, but
Not for me. I believe in that kind of thing.
yeah, but it's the way it is.
Yeah. What is it about Greece that so entices you, do you think?
I
Just a
guess it's just muscle memory.
Yeah. So Odysseus is your favorite?
He was my favorite. Yeah. Yep. He's always been my favorite.
Why?
Well, Odysseus was one of the kings that went to rescue Helen from Troy.
Right.
And but he was kind of a outlier. He was different from most of them. And he angered Poseidon at one point. So Poseidon made it very difficult for him to get home after the war. So the war took 10 years, and there was an additional 10 that he took on his journey home for the Odyssey. And he had lots of adventures with his men and so forth, but like with the Cyclops and stuff. So, but he's always been in my heart ever since I was young, because he did things. He did interesting things, like escape from the Cyclops by clinging underneath a ram, by hanging onto its wool and things like that. They very fascinated me as a little girl. And and I still like him.
Yeah. So if you had it, like when I asked Dad earlier in his interview, I asked him, he's always told me that if he could start all over again, what he would study, and he said biology.
He wanted to be a marine biologist, I think.
Yeah, and what about you though? What would, if you were to
if I had it to do all over again, and I knew what I know now.
Yeah, and I already know you don't want kids, so.
Enough of that. No, I would probably be a Bronze Age archaeologist if I could. And along with, everything else I learned, I studied Mycenaean Greek, which was the tablets that Ventris and Chadwick deciphered, and then then Homeric Greek and Classical Greek and Archaic Greek, and
but you know how to read ancient Greek?
I did once.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you don't really use it anymore.
With the help of a dictionary and maybe occasionally a trot.
Yeah. I don't know what a trot is.
A trot is a translation.
Oh, okay. There you go again. with your hashtags.
Yeah. Well, that's what we used to call it.
Did you get to go on digs?
Oh, not officially, but I used to get to watch them in the Agora when I was in Greece, or wherever. And in Pylos, I got to go down into the dig house and see all the artifacts. And the couple of the ladies, one of whom is world famous Bronze Age archaeologist at the moment, and the other one teaches in Walla Walla. They had this object and they couldn't figure out what it was. And it was a long, skinny thing, and it looked like it had a prong on it. And I'm looking at it, and they said, we can't figure out what this would be used for. I said, it's a tapestry needle. And they looked at each other, and they looked at me, and by golly, bingo. So I was always doing that, One time I was in the archaeology, in the museum, the National Museum, and in the basement, they would let scholars read the stones that they had there. And one of these scholars who was he was leading the other half of the American School summer sessions from mine when I was in Greece in '74, and so I'm walking past and I'm looking at what he's doing, and he said, I just can't figure out. He says, I know there's something about this. I can't, and it's just, and I'm standing up. He's sitting down at the window. I'm standing up, and the light is different. And I look at it, and I said, well, it's a palimpsest, which means, in case you didn't know.
Well, I know what a palindrome is.
Palimpsest is something that's been written over something else.
Oh, cool.
So if they got tired of something, they would erase it and write over it. Sure. Like they do that with
paintings
manuscripts and everything else.
Sure.
So this was on stone, and that's what was giving him fits, because the way he was looking at it, it looked, the cuts that made the letters were in the wrong place. And so he about jumped up and kissed me at that point. Because I had just... But, that sort of thing...
I love how when you said that word and you looked at me with that look that I got so often in my childhood, which is, if you don't know that word, you better damn well know it by the end of the day. And we'll get back to you.
Yes. There'll be a quiz later.
There'll be a quiz later, and there was every time. Wow, that's so cool. So when you taught at SPU?
SPU, Seattle Pacific.
Yeah, and what did you teach when you were there?
I was an instructor in the art department teaching art history for 7 years. And 1 year, my friend Christina went on sabbatical so she could finish her PhD. And so I got to take her classes, which included
You mean give them or take them?
Teach them.
Teach them, yeah.
Included Greek and ancient history, and so that was cool.
That's cool. Not to bring me up because, this is about you.
I've already brought you
I
up.
know, but I'm just, yes, you've already brought me up. Well done. Well done. Tell the story about me.
The year I was at the American School.
Go ahead.
1 year when we were all in Greece, and you were a very small child.
Yes.
You were 3. You decided one morning that you would choke on a piece of bread, and everybody was standing around going, I said to your father, I said, well, pick her up by her feet and shake her.
Dip her in the water.
Yeah. Oh, he picked you up by your feet and shook you, and the bread fell out.
That was Achilles' joke. Give me some credit there.
Not yet. We were at Sunion. You're still 3. How you managed to live that long, I do not understand. But anyway, we were all looking over here, and all the guards were looking over there, and we were wondering what was on. So we wandered over, and they said, the guards all gestured, stop, don't move. So we stopped and waited, and pretty soon one of them reached down and pulled up, guess who had been climbing up the 300-foot face of the cliff by herself.
Still do that.
And got to the top, and they just grabbed you because everybody had been afraid. All the guards that were standing there looking over, they were scared to say anything for fear that you'd lose your footing. So
yeah, little mountain goat.
But somebody protects you, I think.
Yeah, I've nearly died several times
It's not your time to die yet.
Yeah.
I know there's some weird guardian angel that kind of protects us, because I know sometimes I'm getting ready to go somewhere, and for some reason I don't go for maybe 10 minutes after I was supposed to go. And in front of me is a hideous accident, which I would have been involved in if I'd been there 10 minutes earlier.
Yeah.
And so I think there really is something to that.
Well, let's hope so. Let's knock on wood for that. All right, so let's push forward. You have so many crazy stories, I know, but...
Did I ever tell you about the time I was on the football team at Coronado High?
No.
No? I was warming the bench.
Is that a euphemism, you dirty girl?
No, of course not. And I had on the jersey and the pads and the whole 9 yards, and we were parodying the football game as
Powder puffs or whatever.
In halftime or something. But the quarterback at that high school was about 2 feet tall, and he was very elusive.
Oh.
And I saw him make runs that other quarterbacks would never be able to make. I always wondered what happened to him.
Oh, do you remember his name?
No.
Oh. So you retired, but wait, I do want to touch on the fact that you're an incredibly good artist. You're an exceptional artist, I think, and you're one of those that can look at something and then mimic it perfectly. You've edited books, you've illustrated books.
Illustrated now, I think it's 16 or 17 books. I've done illustrations for. Some of them I just had 2 or 3 illustrations in them, and some of them I did all the illustrations.
Yeah, art and architecture is one that pops in my brain.
Art and architecture in the art and
orange.
Archeology in the ancient world. That was the one I edited and did all the drawings. I typeset that one too.
You're a poet. You've written tons of poetry. Yeah. Many are Greek focused, ancient Greek focused, and now you focus a lot of your time on art.
Yeah, mixed media art. It's fun. I never met an art supply I didn't like.
No shit. You have a lot of art supplies.
Yes, and
you teach art, and
I teach workshop type classes. You know, just afternoons or all day or whatever in mixed media. And right now I'm addicted to stencils and shiny paint. I don't know.
She's
why.
1/3 salmon though. So.
Yeah.
Yes.
Where? This is my earliest memory, actually.
Okay.
When I was about 2.5 or 3, I remember I was out of the house living with my grandmother and grandfather in El Paso because my parents were in Panama, and I couldn't go because I had some ridiculous kind of anemia, and I had to stay where the doctor was. And at that time I had what we called a criada, who was a Mexican nursemaid. Soledad, who was wonderful. And Soledad had scolded me for something, and I was out sitting on this sidewalk. Maybe I'd lost her scissors. I think that was it.
She could get some now. You've got 50 pairs here.
Well, there's,
Yeah.
And she was cross with me, and I was out sitting on the stirb cone in front of the house, and I looked up, and here comes, I kid you not, down the street, and this was on an army base in El Paso, mind you. It wasn't in town or anything. Comes this cart with a woman in what I later discovered was Mycenaean dress, but I didn't know it at the time. It was a blouse with embroidery at the
And
neck.
where were you? You were in El Paso?
In Paso, Texas.
Okay. Yeah.
And she was in a cart, and the cart was being pulled by, I think it was a lion, as I remember. She's coming along.
I'm sorry, what?
She's coming along in this cart.
No, backtrack. It was being pulled by a lion?
I think so.
Okay.
Now this,
I'm working with you. I'm there.
And here she comes, and she stops the cart in front of me and hands me a pair of scissors and drives on.
Whoa, that gives me the shivers.
Yes, well, you can see why I remember it, but I cannot explain it at all. But that, I swear on 23,000 stacks of Bibles that's what I remember. I took the scissors into the house and gave them the scissors, and I did not tell her where I had gotten them. But I just,
The guardian angel and
you
the
can tell
angel.
I'm still, even now.
Yeah. Wow, that's a great story.
But
apple doesn't fall very far from the tree, Ma.
Yeah, well,
The wackadoodle stories.
that was my earliest memory. So I've always thought that that person in the cart driven by a lion. I later found out there was a goddess called Kybele that had a cart driven by lions.
Really?
And I'm wondering if that wasn't some sort of thing that came down from Greece and so forth,
Before
from
you even knew.
from Mycenae and all.
Yeah.
Before
So cool.
And I was a horrible little kid to poor old Soledad. I used to go on my tricycle and disappear, and she didn't know where I was. And my most poor thing, when I was about 4, she took me to church one Sunday, and she was a Catholic, of course, being
But you
Mexican.
guys were Episcopalian, yeah?
Yeah, well, she took me with her.
Yeah.
Well, she had to mind me. She
Yeah,
wanted to go
sure.
to church.
Yeah,
that's all.
totally. Yeah.
And at that time, I was bilingual.
Yeah.
So the priest is doing the priestly thing, and they're slinging the censer around and singing the Mass, and I stood up on the pew and sang La Cucaracha.
Oh my. You're like a drunk uncle.
Worse.
So horrible.
Worse. And the priest stopped the whole thing and pointed at me and said, "Get that child out of here." Poor Soledad. She was afraid to go back to that church. She had to change churches.
Oh, Mom, that's terrible.
Oh, yeah, but I would.
El Diablo, El Diablo.
Your grandfather used to inflict discipline with a leather slipper. Mm-hmm. And I was 4, 5, 6, something like 5, maybe 4, because I was still in a crib, I think. And I had been told I couldn't cross the street, but the gas station across the street was giving away balloons.
Ah, classic.
And I couldn't sit down for several hours.
Corporal punishment being the thing back then.
Yeah, back then. But it wasn't often, but when it happened, it hurt.
And,
it's funny the things you remember, isn't it?
It is, or things you don't remember quite right. I will put links to things we talked about on Hey Human Podcast so people can check out some of the books or some of the, just the stuffs. Thanks, Ma.
You're welcome.
Say goodbye to the nice
Bye,
folks.
everybody.
Hi, Paya.
Hey, sweetie.
Thanks for being on Hey Human.
You're welcome. I feel like I've been validated. I'm, in fact, a human, huh?
You are, in fact. Well, I don't know, because rumors abound. Are you my real daddy?
Well, only your mother knows for sure.
That is true. Let us begin.
Well, by all means.
All right. Talk about your humble beginnings.
My humble beginnings. Well, I was born in a log cabin on the prairie.
That wasn't you, Dad.
Oh, sorry about that.
Maybe in a previous life,
Yes.
if you believe in that kind of thing.
Well, some of us only.
Some of us in this room, not so much. Some of us, much.
Anyway, I was born in New York City. My parents were immigrants, one from Russia, one from Poland. My father came over. He was already well into adulthood. Remember, he had walked out of Russia, after the Russian Revolution.
He walked out of Russia.
He did. He walked right across Europe.
Yeah.
Well, took the trains, snuck around, did all sorts of shenanigans.
He spoke a lot of languages, so he was able to
Well, he picked up languages very readily. It's a real adventure story. But, so he wound up sometime in the 20s. He came here once and got kicked out.
To the United States?
Yeah.
New York?
I'm not sure how I forget now the route he took. And then he came back again and made it through that time.
When you said he walked across Russia, do you literally mean across? Russia's big.
Well, he comes from Western Russia.
Right.
So, the distance from there to Poland is not as much as if you're coming from Siberia. But anyway, yeah.
As the old saying goes.
He didn't have any money, so he had to con his way across the continent.
Is he a very bright man?
Extremely. Yes. My mother came in when she was quite young.
Uh-oh. There's the
teenager.
phone.
Yeah.
Are you going to answer that, Dad?
Mom got it.
Okay, can we turn that off, maybe?
I
Or turn it on quiet or something?
This
is big time podcasting,
Can
Dad.
you slow that down?
Slowing it down?
Well, stop
Everything's relative.
Grandma came when she was much younger. She was in her 20s. And Dad was in his 30s when they got married.
That's pretty old for then.
Well, what can I say? When I was born, as I remember it,
Well,
remember my birth certificate anyway. He was 39 and she was 29.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's a big gap.
Yeah.
Had he been married before? Do you
Who?
know? Your father.
I don't think so.
Okay, so they met.
In New York.
They got married and started their family.
Well, in stages.
Yes, because
Yeah.
you and your brother are 6.5 years apart.
Yes, something that seems to run in a family.
It does, doesn't it? So, you're born into the Bronx?
Yeah.
Ish?
In the Bronx.
In the Bronx. Not on the street or anything. Were you?
I don't think so. But I believe that the hospital was in the Bronx, but I don't remember.
Yeah, you were born. You didn't really pay attention, probably.
Yeah, I don't remember from the birth certificate where
okay.
it was signed off as.
So, you and Grandma and Grandfather were very poor,
Yes.
and you lived in a one...
Well, remember, this was 1931. You remember the Depression?
Well, I mean, I wasn't there, but yeah, I
Yeah,
do.
but
I recall it.
You recall, you've read about it.
I have.
Yeah. So, yes, he was poor. My mother was poor. The next door neighbors were poor.
Yes.
You know, everybody on the street
Keeping
was
up
poor.
with the Joneses was not so hard.
You know, you try to avoid keeping down with them.
Yes. So that was the inclination, I suppose, was to study hard? To get out of that?
Well, no. What happened was that when I was about 7 years old, I think, I came down with what they finally diagnosed as rheumatic fever because they didn't know any better. Because I had a heart murmur. I'm sure at the time I had a heart murmur, which nobody ever bothered to listen to before.
I have a heart murmur, so it's genetic.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I was about to say, people who get heart murmurs after rheumatic fever means that if you had a heart murmur after you had what sounded or looked like rheumatic fever instead of just the flu, they thought you had rheumatic fever.
So there was no test per se.
Well, I don't know. Point is, I wound up in the hospital with some, it's a place for a 7-year-old. It's pretty scary. But after that was all said and done, they recommended that we go out west for health reasons.
The sunnier climate. New York gets pretty wet and cold, I suppose.
Right. And, of course, my father couldn't go because he had to stay and work. So my mom and my brother was just an infant in arms then. And so we took the train out west, where a cousin met us at the train station in Los Angeles. He found an apartment, a one-room apartment for the family to live in Hollywood, right next, just a couple of doors down from a little movie studio, and on the street behind us was Columbia Pictures.
That must have been so neat for a little boy.
Well, yeah, I was remembering at one time I came out of the house to go to school, and there was somebody leading a lion on a leash into the studio to make a picture.
Really?
And one time I came out and there was a gunfight going on behind the palm trees on the street, and you know the whole studio set up with the reflectors and all that. So yeah, I mean there were things.
What did your dad do for work back then when you were before he
He
left
was a
New York?
waiter.
A waiter, okay.
Yeah, he had originally studied to be an accountant, but of course with the Depression and all that, he didn't have the money to stay in school, had to work, and he wound up when the only jobs available was
Waiting,
because there the only money you earned was from tips,
I have a recollection that, did he work at the Waldorf?
Well, he worked all over the place.
Okay, because I remember being little and having Grandpa tell me stories about working at the Waldorf, and when you grow up you think, was that a story I actually heard
Yeah.
or was that mixed in with other stories, and as family stories get so...
Yeah, but as a waiter he worked in all kinds of places.
Okay.
And when he was in
He was a good chef. I remember he would make extraordinary food for us.
Yeah, well, he did that too. He once had a little diner in L.A., and during the Second World War, he enlisted in the Merchant Marine, and shipped out as a cook, sometimes as a steward.
While you were little ones?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, he sailed on a really dangerous trip. They went to the Russian trip, the North Atlantic Russian trip in a convoy and all that.
Is that because he spoke Russian along with all the other
No,
languages?
it's because that's where the job was.
Okay.
You go to the Union Hall and you sign up.
Was that to make money for the family, or for him was it also escapism, or do you know?
That's a very difficult question to answer. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it could have been any one of a number of reasons.
And what did Grandma do?
She worked in a shirt factory in Los Angeles.
A seamstress, right?
Yeah, she sewed buttons on shirts.
Grandpa's gone off to fight in a war.
Not to fight. He was in a merchant marine.
What? I don't understand the distinction.
That's a civilian sailor.
Oh, I did not know this.
Yeah, no, the merchant marine was. They had on many of the ships. They had naval gun crews, but the sailors were just like hiring a job,
Oh.
But they were essential because they had to get these ships over for supplies to Russia and all that. They'd go over in these big convoys and, try to...
How are they not sitting ducks doing?
They were.
Wow.
They were. In fact, the German U-boats prowled the North Atlantic and sank a lot of stuff. They sank. When a tanker was hit by a torpedo, it was just a great 4th of July explosion. And the people on those tankers, they did not have much chance.
Yeah.
He usually was on a freighter. But even so, yeah, that's why they would have destroyers escorting these things, and the destroyers would run perimeter around the convoys.
Did you hear from him during that time? Did he write letters or
to
keep you?
If he did, I don't remember.
Yeah.
I was only 10 years old when we got into the war, and so no, I wouldn't remember.
I'm curious, at that time, especially during World War II, and your side of the family being Jewish, was there any? How was that being in America, knowing that was going on?
I didn't know. I had no idea, and I'm not sure who knew. While it was going on.
It wasn't until they liberated the camps that they really understood.
Well, I think there were people in government who knew what was going on, but we didn't hear about that. At least I don't remember any discussion, seeing anything in the papers or whatever.
Was there anti-Semitism back in L.A.? I mean, it's sort of the joke that L.A. is filled with Jewish people, so I don't know if that... Do you remember anything like that, or no? It was totally...
I was never aware of anything anti-Semitic. I was aware of bullying and so forth because I was a transplant in the middle of a grammar school, elementary school. Oh,
that's brutal, yeah.
But as far as the motivation for it, no, I had no idea.
You're just a weird kid like the rest of us that get bullied.
Right,
yeah.
Yeah.
So, you're highly intelligent. Did you ace elementary, high school, and know already what you wanted to pursue for college?
I got fascinated with science fiction when I was in junior high school.
Any people in particular? Any writers? Asimov and
all the writers, and I also read all kinds of interesting natural history books and so forth. I remember reading Paul de Kruif's book on the microbe hunters, which was about bacteriology and how they discovered disease, causes of disease.
And how old were you then when you read that?
Oh, I don't know, somewhere an adolescent or pre-adolescent, somewhere in that range.
Sure.
And I became a museum junior at the Los Angeles Museum of Invertebrate Paleontology. I used to go to classes there. We used to go out and hunt for fossils in the sandbanks and so forth.
That's so cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so.
How fun.
So I was always interested in science, and that was it. And when I graduated from high school, I had good enough grades to apply to colleges. And I used to go, when I was in high school, on Friday nights, my brother and I sometimes I would, as my brother, I guess, when he got a little older, would drive out to Caltech and go to the seminars, the public seminars there, and listen to some of the great scientists of the time.
Which were astounding, the minds of that era.
Yeah. We would typically hear Linus Pauling talk about chemistry. And,
what? Seriously?
Yeah.
That's so cool.
And never heard Feynman. Feynman was after my time there.
You've read his books, though. I'm a fan of Heinlein.
Yes. Yeah, well, I have to show you before we leave a whole bunch of books that you will just love.
Do I get to take them home?
It's kind of doubt it. They're e-books.
Oh, they're e-books. Okay.
Yeah.
So you were in high school and you were heading over to Caltech to check out all the...
To go to the seminars.
That's amazing. I love that. All the colleges still do that, by the way, listeners. I know that in Nashville, right now I'm in Seattle, sitting here with my dad talking, but and the University of Washington has great lecture series that are open to the public on all sorts of topics. You can see physicists and biologists and
yes.
psychiatry and psychology and the whole and art and history. It's fantastic. And Vanderbilt in Nashville also has this, as do colleges all across the United States, and I'm sure globally. And if you get a chance, they're free. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it is.
So you went to Caltech and MIT. Did you know both? Caltech was undergrad and MIT was graduate?
Yes.
Did you know, you knew you liked science upon graduation?
From high school.
Of high school,
yes.
Right. How did you decide? Because I remember I asked you once if you could do it all over again. You said you would go into biology instead.
Very likely, yeah.
Why did you not choose that?
I was fascinated with, of course, being a science fiction addict, with the whole idea of, the physical universe and one thing and another. I got a scholarship to go to the Oak Ridge School of Reactor Technology, which the AEC, at that time, the Atomic Energy Commission, sponsored promising students from universities and from industry, both, to get into this new field of commercial nuclear power. And this is all about nuclear reactors and electrical power. So I went there to Oak Ridge, which is a real...
Was that part of your Caltech studies?
No, that was like going to a separate school for a master's degree.
Okay, got it. So you finished at Caltech with what degree?
With a Bachelor of Science.
Okay.
Or as they call it, a BS degree.
Yeah.
And spent a year in Oak Ridge, which was about 20 miles west of Knoxville, on the east end of
the
Tennessee.
Place where you love the weather.
Yeah, and the summers were brutal, hot and humid, and the winters were wet, and they weren't too bad, but the summers were just obnoxious. You'd go into the building where the classes were held, and the air conditioning was really running full blast, and it was very cool and quite dry, and you went out of the building to get lunch, and it was like being hit with a 2x4.
Yeah.
Just awful. And then after that, I went to work at the Bettis Atomic Power Laboratory. I worked in the Admiral Rickover's program.
And this was a time when all this stuff was pretty terrifying to the American public, right? There was a lot of...
That came a little later. Now, at this time, this was in the about 1959. They were promising electricity too cheap to meter and all that sort of stuff. But we were working on nuclear power for the Naval Reactor Program. I worked there for 2 years before I went to graduate school. And I was working on a shielding program, the shielding research part things.
To keep from, melting down?
No, the shielding is to protect people outside the reactor from the radiation.
Your degree is in physics.
My undergraduate degree.
Okay, and then you went on to Oak Ridge, and that degree was...
There's no degree, it was just a certificate of graduation.
Okay, and you got a star and
whatever.
a bill.
Yeah, whatever.
No, you you got free rides, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, at Oak Ridge, certainly, yes.
You had a scholarship to Caltech too, I thought.
For part of the time I was there, yes.
And MIT, you had a scholarship.
Fellowships.
Fellowships.
Yeah.
That's the same idea.
Yeah, I did, by and large, for most of the time.
And what did you study at MIT?
Nuclear engineering.
Ah. So how did you get embryology in there?
That was not till I came to teach at the University of Washington.
You didn't want to put all your eggs in one basket? No! Dad is not laughing at that incredibly funny joke.
Bob Rushmer, who was a professor at the U, had gotten people interested in a program of bioengineering, in which engineers would team up with biologists to try to advance the whole ideas that were at the time, starting to grow really important in bioengineering. And he introduced me to Tom Shepard, who was an embryologist, and we clicked. We got along real well, and I would spend a day a week or whatever in his lab working on the embryos. He was a director of the Central Laboratory for Human Embryology, and we do all sorts of experiments on mammalian embryos.
Not human, just mammalian.
No, rats.
Yeah. I would imagine that would be a no-no even then.
Rats. Yeah.
Rats.
Yeah, rats. But this is, embryos in the first several days of development.
What were you trying to find?
Really studying what causes malformations in embryos and what embryos can do and can't do.
And a rat's embryo is close enough to a human's that you could...
At that age, yes.
Ascertain what...
At that age, yeah. They go through the same stages. The only difference is how the coding and the genes work. And,
to make you a rat versus a human?
That's right.
Or a rat human if...
A rat versus a human or an elephant or a shark or whatever.
Right.
So we did experiments on rat embryos when I was there in the lab with him, and we published a few papers, and that was good.
So from my childhood, I recall you traveled, enough, and I recall did you go to Hanford a lot?
Yeah, well, that was after I came to the University of Washington, and that was when I was still doing nuclear engineering, and I was on a committee, met in Hanford periodically, that were sort of the oversight committee for what the Battelle Memorial Institute, the Battelle National Laboratory in Richland, was doing to evaluate the effect of releases of radionuclides from the Oak Ridge, from the Hanford site, from all the developments for producing plutonium for the nuclear weapons.
In other words, the potential hazard to humanity around the...
Well, because there were releases. The smokestacks had released some, small amounts during reprocessing and one thing and another. And there was a big push to evaluate exactly what could be expected to have been the effect, because there was a lot of agitation going at the time of people claiming that they were downwind of the releases and were exposed to radiation and had suffered ill effects from that. And what the Battelle Institute was funded to do was to evaluate just how much the releases were and what was known about the effects of these amounts of exposure, and whether you could reasonably be determined that they were the primary cause.
And?
Well, when it really came right down to it, it seemed very unlikely that the amount that actually was released and the spreading, so that the amount that any individual got would be a major cause, although statistics are, people have different susceptibilities different susceptibility, different genetic structure, and some people are much more susceptible to chemicals in the environment, to radioactivity in the environment. But the radioactive releases didn't add all that much more than is naturally in the environment. There's uranium naturally occurring in the environment. There's radon released from uranium in the ground.
And you were a specialist in, I remember you doing a bunch of work with radon.
Yeah, we had a program at the U on radon, which was interesting. I worked with a colleague in the physics department, 2 colleagues in the physics department. And we wrote some stuff about radon. And
there's a lot of radon in Nashville. A lot. I mean, I assume there's radon everywhere, but it's high concentrations.
Yeah, well, it's extremely variable. In fact, almost to the point
it's very rocky in Nashville. So
one block can have a high reading, and the next block could be a low reading. So
sure,
it's extremely variable, and a great deal depends on how the house is constructed.
Yeah, brick is a big thing.
And what the ventilation in the house is like.
Sure.
All sorts of stuff.
Yeah. Do I recall you sitting on some sort of panel that you were trying to decide what to do with uranium once it was...
That's waste disposal. Yeah. That's one of the main disputes going on, controversies going on about what to do with the radioactive waste from the commercial nuclear power and the military nuclear weapon program.
Right.
And that's still unresolved.
What do you think people should do with it?
Well,
greeting card.
There isn't much you can do about it,
yeah.
except to try to stabilize the waste, make it inert, and then all right, where are you going to put it? Well,
how do you make it inert?
By sealing it into glass logs or into grout, concrete type of stuff, or put it into big steel tanks. And that's one of the problems. Back in the 1940s, 1950s, they put the liquid waste into great steel tanks, for example, at places like Hanford, tanks that were designed to last for 30 years, and then be pumped out, made into inert form, and buried in the repositories, the waste repositories. Well, the controversy started and hasn't quit, and the tanks are still there. All they've done up till now, as far as I know, is transfer the waste in the single wall tanks into the big double wall tanks, which is another layer of protection. But those are aging too, so. But
is it just a lack of forward thinking when they began these projects?
No.
And then you have things like in Japan, when an earthquake hits, or then you've got a whole nother ball of wax, right?
To site a nuclear reactor requires a very detailed, very complicated, and very difficult risk analysis. And you try to evaluate all the risks you can think of. And if you can't think of a risk, or you consider a particular kind of risk as being so unlikely that it can only happen every 1,000 years, you may tend not to really study that, because to prevent it would cost so much money that you couldn't afford it anyway. And so when that 1,000-year risk shows up, things
ahead of
happen.
schedule.
Yeah, things happen.
Yeah.
Now, Fukushima was the result of plants were on the seacoast, because cooling water is a problem to cool the waste heat from the plants. And if you're using seawater to cool the plant, like you are in California, for example, in places like, there are nuclear power plants situated along the coast in California, and you have an earthquake which causes a huge tidal wave, which swamps your plant and knocks out electrical power and things like that. That's a risk which perhaps wasn't thought of being likely, given the way that the plant was sited. Well, if That's no worse than why an airplane falls out of the sky because of some bird flies into the engine and you don't have a screen in front of the engine, which will interfere with air intake.
Mm.
You know, so...
A series of unfortunate events.
A series of unfortunate events. And the Russian reactor at Chernobyl was a series of human error that caused that. The design of the plant was such that instead of being fail-safe when it began to overheat, it just got faster and faster and faster.
This may be...
That was a design error.
Did we help them with that? I imagine the Cold War would... When was that built, Chernobyl? I don't know my history on that.
Oh, I don't know when it was built. I'm trying to remember when the Chernobyl accident was, like 10, 15 years ago?
Longer than that, I think.
20 years ago.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was unforeseen. Well, in retrospect, it was because the design of the reactor was such that if you lost cooling, instead of the reactor shutting down, it speeded up.
Mm.
Which...
it gets hotter and hotter and hotter.
Hotter and hotter and hotter, and it finally, as it were, blew its stack.
Right.
So...
There's not much you can do to prevent that.
They tried, but they, I guess, were not prepared in the control room for what was happening, either because they didn't have the right training or because when it happened they didn't have the right people on duty. I'm not sure. I don't remember the details.
This is the problem with all nations, even in Cold Wars with each other, because the minds that can help build these things, well, we can help each other, the nations, it seems to get lost, right? The sharing of information based on fear of what the other may be capable of. I don't know.
Remember, nations are competitors. They compete
I understand.
for resources.
Still bums me out. I'm allowed to be bummed out.
If you like.
Here's a question. A lot of my friends are worried about eating fish at this point after the Japanese incident. But I remember you and I talked about it, and that you said that the fish going over the oceans and such, it contaminates pretty well. Is that true?
There is natural radioactivity in the ocean.
Yes.
From dissolved radionuclides from the land. You are carrying radioactive potassium, as all living things are. You're radioactive. I'm radioactive. The fish, if they are radioactive, the place where they would really be enough to worry about would be right around the bay.
Yeah.
Around where the reactor melted down. But as that stuff goes out into the ocean, it dilutes more and more and more. And so the concentration in fish are lower and lower and lower.
You have more mercury is a bigger worry, probably.
Well, mercury is because it accumulates in the fat. There are some radionuclides that accumulate in the bones. People don't usually eat fish bones. And you only eat the flesh of the fish, the muscle of the fish. Most people don't eat the insides, the viscera and so forth. So the risk of contamination from stuff that grows in the sea is probably red tide, domoic acid poisoning, paralytic shellfish poisoning. You want to be careful about eating shellfish when the domoic acid levels are high, and states on the coast usually post warnings about that. You want to be careful about fish like tuna and so forth that are long-lived, that eat fish, mm-hmm. that accumulate mercury,
Because you are what you eat.
Well, you're exposed to what you eat, certainly.
Yes.
But mercury is a big problem for developing fetuses. You'd have to eat an awful lot of fish to have the mercury poisoning, although there are places in freshwater, Montana, for example, or Wyoming, rather, publishes a list. The Department of Fish and Wildlife publish a list of freshwater fish you should not eat, at least not much of, but not eat, and fish you should eat if you're going to eat fish.
Trout's okay, right?
Yeah, for the most part.
Good, because I like trout. I also love salmon.
Yeah, well, so you just got to. Of course, it won't be long before fish is so expensive that you're not going to be able to afford it anyway.
Yeah. We're emptying out the oceans pretty quickly of fish.
Well,
for sure.
that and the food chain is getting screwed up with global warming and with acidification of the oceans,
which is caused by
dissolving carbon dioxide, which produces carbonic acid, which lowers the pH of the ocean, which causes things like corals to die and this sort of stuff.
Yeah. And evolution is too slow, I suppose, to come up with a fish that can combat that in our generations.
Well, fish can tolerate it a lot more than corals can, but still.
Yeah.
I don't know for a fact how much the lower pH affects the development of fish eggs or what have you.
Sure. It's changing the sexes of fish. I know that.
Well, that's chemicals, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, the chemicals
more
of
than
all the unused drugs and everything we pee out and ends up into the waters. My friend who's a biologist and I just had this conversation about amphibians and fishies changing their sex midlife in response to the chemicals in the water.
Some fish did that even before.
Sure. Don't seahorses do that? Or seahorses can
seahorses
have their own babies. Is that what it is?
Seahorses gestate their own babies. The female seahorse has really figured out the problem of pregnancy, so she sticks the eggs she produces onto the male, and he carries them in his pouch to lay hatch.
That's a good move.
Well, it was interesting to speculate where in evolution this idea arose, but
it's the ultimate hold my purse, I'm going shopping.
Yeah, right.
Interesting. So you had a long career as a scientist.
As an engineer.
And you are a scientist.
Well, yes.
You always self-deprecation.
Well, I got into biological sciences, embryology, rather late.
All right, if you could have a dinner party with 3 folks from the various fields of which you've studied, from undergrad on up.
Alive or dead?
Yes, either. We'll prop them up. We'll reanimate them for your behalf. 3 or 4. Who would you pick? Who would you want to have dinner with?
Well, Carl Sagan.
Yes.
Richard Feynman.
Yes, those are my 2.
I'll
make the cocktails.
Yeah. A guy like maybe Max Tegmark.
Who's that?
I'll show you later. I'll show you his books.
Okay. Well, explain to them. They can't see. Who is
Oh, well, he's a physicist who's written some really great far-out books about the multiverse.
Oh, cool.
And about quantum mechanics, about stuff that it almost reads like science fiction. It's really so great.
Fantastic.
I would say he's a great writer. He really writes fun stuff. The difference between someone with 120 IQ, 130 IQ, 140 IQ means they can, seem very smart, but they're really great scientists.
I think theoretical physicists had to be way out there because the things they come up with.
They are in a range where you really can't measure it. It really doesn't make any sense. Intelligence tests mean nothing. And there are all kinds. Hawking has written some great books, and there are others.
But dinner party. All right, let's. Okay, so we got Feynman. We've got, what's his name?
Max Tegmark.
Yeah, Max Tegmark. We've got Carl Sagan.
And I've got people who've written some of the books I've been enjoying reading. I don't have memory.
But who's one other person that you'd like to have to dinner?
Well, let me think.
Any females on the list?
Oh yeah, there is one. Lisa. I can't remember her last name now. She wrote one of these books on. She's a particle physicist.
Cool.
And she wrote a great book on particle physics and the multiverse and so forth.
Okay, let me look it up while you're talking.
Yeah.
Lisa. Is that EES or ISA?
LISA. Lisa Randall.
Yes, I was just going to tell you. Lisa Randall is the physicist. She's a good-looking woman.
Yeah.
Anyway, Lisa Randall. So Lisa Randall, Carl Sagan, Feynman.
Richard Feynman.
Richard Feynman, who is so dreamy. Dead, but so dreamy. And who was the other?
Max Tegmark.
Oh, that's Max Tegmark. So that's your dinner party. You retired, and then you started writing. Were you always, I remember you wrote poetry, right? So you've always dabbled on the other side of your brain.
When I was in high school, they taught me to write in a class that they made everyone take. And you had to write an essay every week and so forth. And I guess that stood me in good stead of learning some of the craft of writing. Stood me in good stead when I applied to Caltech, because one of the 4-hour exams, there were 4 of those, one of the 4-hour exams was writing a 4-hour essay on some topic, in a set of topics they chose. I wrote on the sighting of airports in the future. So that's where reading science fiction comes in handy, because most of the ideas, or a lot of the suggestional ideas, came from some of the ideas I had read in science fiction. And, I knew the difference between a subject and a verb and all that, and how to write, so... And then when I wrote my papers, that was useful, because my papers generally were in English instead of in the sort of stuff that a lot of scientists write.
Latin?
No.
You didn't write in Latin?
No, just in really tortured English and jargon and stuff.
So you write fiction?
When I retired, I took some writing classes in the what do you call program at the University of Washington for people.
For emeritus folk?
No, for public.
Just open. Extended. Sure.
Extension program.
Yeah.
I wrote a couple of mysteries.
They were very good. I enjoyed them.
And then I was at a Pacific Northwest Writers Association meeting. I guess it's been like 10 years ago now, maybe, or thereabouts.
Everything is 10 years ago for you. Have you noticed that?
No, well,
it all happens.
My memory. I was at a Pacific Northwest Writers Association monthly meeting, and the speaker was telling us the kind of attitude we should have about writing. He says, don't be put down by what other people are saying. If you're writing, just sit down and write. He said, for example, I'm going to put a couple of words on the whiteboard here, and I want you to take 10 minutes and write. Just write. Just forget the outside world, just write.
Yeah.
So he wrote on a blackboard, woman and pirate. And I thought, that sounds great. So I started writing and wrote about a chapter of a female pirate, attacking a ship and all that sort of stuff. And that sort of got me started. And I thought, well, why not? So I started writing. And I started writing the first book of Margaret, Outrageous Fortune. It was the introduction of this young girl, an 18-year-old, who starts out to become a governess in an earl's home to teach his young children. And that just flowed out. I must have written 60,000, 70,000 words just without really sort of channeling the characters. And then I just kept going. So now I've written 4 60,000 to 70,000 novels for Margaret's Adventures, and I'm working on the 5th one. I've got the first one out as a self-published ebook on Amazon.
It's called Margaret, Outrageous Fortune, and I'll have links to it on my Hey Human podcast page.
Okay, well, thank you.
Yeah. Are you enjoying the process of writing these books?
Very much. Yeah, I can't seem to get away from it.
Yeah. I know. I have to call you every once in a while and tell you to get up and walk around.
Yeah, it's the thing is a lot of it goes on in my head without. Right? They say you should just sit down and write. If it's gibberish, you can edit it. I don't work that way. I mean, I run into a problem. I can't write. And things go on in the head. Sometimes when I can't go to sleep, I'm thinking about these things.
So maybe in an alternate universe, you are a famous book writer.
Well, it would have to be a really alternate one. Yeah.
Do you believe in the multiverse?
Belief isn't the issue. That sounds like religion. The conclusions, the implications of the mathematics, where the mathematics of general relativity and quantum mechanics are right now, imply that it is not inconsistent with the mathematics to have multiverses and more dimensions than the four we know. In fact, in some cases, you can't solve the equations without assuming many more dimensions. And we have things like string theory, in which we've got a bunch of dimensions all wrapped up in infinitesimally thin strings. There are apparently only 4 extendable dimensions. 3 of direction, back and forth, left to right, up and down, and 1 of time that form the space-time continuum. And those are the ones with, that extend out to, presumably it's...
infinite.
Well, there is some debate about whether they existed before the Big Bang, or what they call the Big Bang.
Mm-hmm.
And it was in the Big Bang where some of the theory seems to indicate they formed all these different universes in what's basically an expanding something which carries them.
It reminds me of, do you remember the Superman movie where there's the 3 other, they're like evil Supermen, they're that strong, Zod, and the 2 there's a henchwoman and a henchman.
I think I've heard of it. I don't think I've ever seen it.
Oh, I bet you have. It's old, but I bet you have. It's from way back. Anyway.
Well, that goes back to the old thing, even remember the Star Trek episode in which they ran into this race, which
half and half
which
people?
were half black, half white.
Or blue. They were blue and white, weren't they?
No,
were they black and white?
Black and white. And there were 2 kinds. One which was black and white on this half, the other was black and white the other way.
And they didn't like each other.
They didn't like each other.
Right.
They were mirror images.
Right. Which is great. I mean, Gene Roddenberry was so ahead of his time with as far as political and socio. Yeah. But in this Superman movie, they're in the ice house, the Fortress of Solitude, and they're in a big fight or whatever, and Zod is looking in a reflection of the ice, and it's fracturing, so you see all these different versions of him. I kind of think of it like that in its own way.
Well, people think about whatever way they want for whatever it is they're trying to think about.
Well
but in
said.
case of the physicists, they're dealing with what are the solutions like for these equations, which are the best equations we know at the moment to describe reality. And the solutions suggest certain things. For example, in some of the equations suggest time can run backwards as well as forwards. And so, and things black holes connect to make wormholes and all that sort of stuff. And there's all kinds of stuff that we used to read about in science fiction, one thing and another. But unfortunately, along with, yes, these things can happen, doesn't mean we can make any use of them.
Sure.
Because by the time you got into a black hole, the gravitational force would be so heavy at your feet before your head got there that you kind of get pulled in half. So, that's from looking at it from the outside. What it would look like from the inside as you're going through is another question entirely. And time distortions and so forth in gravitational fields or in acceleration fields. And
it's so yummy, all of it.
Yeah, well, It's all what the possible solutions of the equations suggest. All that's all well and good, but there's no way to sort it out until you can do the experiment.
Mm-hmm.
As yet, I don't think anybody's figured out how to set up an experiment that could really test an alternate universe. Because we're pretty well stuck in the one we're in.
Speak for yourself.
Well, in any event, if you're interested, these books are great, and I expect you will be. They're written for, quote, the layperson
Yes.
in mind, but it isn't just any layperson, because sometimes you got to remember what was said
Yes.
10 chapters ago.
I love reading about neuroscience, but when I read Dr. Redish's book, I would get to a section. I'd be happily moving along through the book, and then I'd get to a section, and I'd be like, oh man. So then I have to go look things up, but I mean that's a wonderful thing.
You can if it's a hardback. It's kind of a nuisance when you're reading an ebook.
Oh well, yes, I suppose.
Because it's hard to get back.
I haven't made I like books. I like the way they smell. I like holding them. I have not leapt into I do like audio. I am okay with people telling me a story as I'm driving or whatnot. But yeah, thanks for being on the show.
You're welcome.
Daddy?
Yes.
I love you like you were my own father.
Yes, well, I'm glad to be loved like I was your own father.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.